Welcome to the High Performance Interviews. Oh my gosh, I am so thrilled because today we have got Karen Hall. She's calling in from Arizona to join us. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. I am so happy to be with you. Lucy and I met over a year ago and we immediately connected. Her warmth and her energy, she has such an abundance mentality and I just loved her. And then things got busy and we didn't stay connected. And then we recently reconnected and it was so fun to talk to her again. And I just immediately felt like I had missed an old friend.
It was so much like that, wasn't it? It really was like that. And it's the energetics, the energetic connection. And then the universe brings you back to those people. And I then worked with you, Karen, obviously on my first publication, and you did that. And it's absolutely, I'm blown away by that. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you. So please introduce yourself and what you do and why you do what you do. And then we'll dig a little bit deeper.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm Karen Hall. I am an emotional intelligence leadership coach. I'm also a publisher, and producer. And so I help elevate people so that they can share their story either in print or speaking on stage. And my favorite thing about that is I'm a very curious person and I love learning about people. And my husband says when we go to the store, it takes a long time for me to shop because he said, you make friends with everybody and you have this sign on your forehead and it says, tell me your story. Said, and complete strangers, the bus driver, the cashier, whatever. He said, they just start telling you their stories. So that has always been a love of mine is listening. And in fact, I have to tell you this funny story. When I was a teenager, they had like I don't know if they have these in the UK, but here we have all these pageants. Like if you want to run for Miss Arizona or Miss USA or whatever, they have towns that have those and they have organizations that have those pageants and things. So somebody said to me, you should try out for this pageant. And they said, what's your talent? And I thought, and I said, my talent is listening. And I don't know how I would do that on stage. Because I don't play the piano and I didn't dance and I didn't have visible kind of a talent like that. And that was the first time I ever really identified that in my mind. That was one of my talents. And that was what I absolutely love to do.
And it's such a strength because I remember in a training that I was in, and I said, I don't think I have any strengths. And he said, we dug a little bit deeper, and that was the exact same thing. He said, you are such a great listener. And the other thing was, you've got patience. A lot of people don't know how to listen, they're just waiting to respond, and they don't have patience. I think those two things come together because you're patiently listening and understanding. And your thing you said before about curiosity, Karen, that's definitely a peak performance skill, I would say, to be curious and to ask the questions. And because you're curious and you ask the questions and you're a good listener, that's why people talk to you.
Oh, thank you. That I do think you're absolutely right. And no wonder you and I connected and I felt that energetic. It was just like I was so drawn to you. It was magnetic actually. And I think that's because I sensed those things in you as well. And there aren't very many people, honestly, that really to listen, that really care to listen because as you mentioned, most people are thinking about what they're going to say next. And so to find somebody who really cares when they're listening, oh, it just feels so good.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. So I would love to go back to a time in your life where maybe you were a teenager, maybe you were at school. What did you know that you were good at then? You knew you were good at listening at some point along there. When did you come to what you do now? Was there something else before that, Karen? Just give us a little bit of insight into your background.
Yes, as a girl, I loved writing. And someone asked me, what was your favorite toy when you were a child? And I thought one of my favorite toys was a camera. I remember when my mom got me a little camera, and I loved taking pictures and telling stories in film. And people were surprised at how I could capture expressions. But it was, like you said, it was patience and it was listening. Because as I was listening, I was thinking, okay, not yet. That's not the expression that I want, and then I would capture it. And then I also got a tape recorder and I would go around interviewing people because I used to do it on paper and just write everything down. But when I got a tape recorder, I was probably nobody knows what a tape recorder is now, but I would record the story. And that was so exciting to me. And I remember that I loved, I don't know if Laura Ingalls Wilder, but she was Little House on the Prairie. And over here, that was just like, she was so popular. And we had a TV show called The Waltons. And there was a writer on that. John Boy was the writer in the family. And so I actually wrote a letter to John Boy and said, Richard Thomas, I want to be a writer just like you. So I had this passion inside me about writing and telling people's stories. And so I started writing when I was 9 years old. I wrote my first book when I was 9. I didn't publish it or anything. I didn't know how to publish it, and neither did my mother. but that was just the passion that kept growing within me, and then telling other people's stories as well. So that led me to studying journalism at the university, and then what I do now. And I just absolutely am thrilled, because part of the process of like the being curious and having the patience and listening is I form connections with people, and connection is so vital to me. And it also is a way that I feel like we find those commonalities and we build a bond. And so it's a very interesting process to me. It's not just like being a reporter. It's making a friend and having that relationship through that process.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So that from 9 years old to right now, that's been your path. That's
Well,
amazing.
I've had some other things in between. I decided at the university that maybe that wasn't going to be something like, like I said, I didn't know how to publish. I just knew how to work for a newspaper because I had been working for a newspaper as a teenager. I had started I did investigative reporting and feature articles, and I love both of those because I love researching. But anyway, I decided I loved food and I loved people and I loved science. And so I became a dietitian. And then that was the other thing that I did. And I found that as I did that, my favorite part was interviewing the people and being a detective and finding out what was the thing that kept them from doing what they knew they was better for their health. And and that was interesting because you used holistic things within your peak performance coaching.
Yeah.
And I did too. And so I realized, though, my husband said, you come home and you just light up when you talk about finding the thing. What was that barrier? And then helping them to overcome that barrier so that they can have better health and a better life. And he said, why don't you just do that part of it? So then I became a life coach. And then because we had also had businesses where we had bought bankrupt businesses and turned them around. I also had corporate training, and I was over sales and marketing, trying to turn the business around. And so then with the life coaching, I did executive coaching where I helped the leaders use more emotional intelligence. And that's how that kind of evolved into that part of it. So it's been an interesting journey, but you and I did have several things that overlapped.
Oh, we certainly did. Oh my goodness, yes. And right there is another thing, because you're talking about executive coaching, and I'm building out a beta program to take workshops into the leadership within companies to do the exact same, that emotional intelligence, the values, the strengths, and all of that, and then the alignment piece. Oh my goodness, yes, no wonder we connect. So,
Yes.
were there any down times where you think this is the thing that got me through, where you feel like that was a real low point in my life? Was there anything like that, Karen?
Yes, we've had several low points in the journey. Sometimes we were the ones that were in the bankrupt situation. And that was the very first situation when we bought a bankrupt business. We didn't realize how we bought it in an economy it was during a savings and loan crisis in the US. And so there was this massive recession, and in Arizona, it had hit really hard. And so in our town, people were just leaving. They were just walking away from their house. And we were in the real estate business and we had a title company. And so nobody was buying houses in this town or this area because there was no industry to support it. And so, how are we going to make a living with this business? We were also supporting my husband's family. And I was also pregnant with our second child. And so with all of that, it was like, how are we going to pay that? And I had been very self-sufficient when I graduated from high school and went to the university. My parents had said, you're on your own. And so I knew as a girl that I had to earn money to pay. I had to buy my own car. I had to pay for the university. And so I was always, I was an entrepreneur from a very young age because I was always having to figure out how I was going to pay for things. So when I graduated from the university, I had done it all. I only had one student loan and pretty much debt free. So all of a sudden, my husband and I had gotten married. He had finished his degree and we buy this bankrupt business and we were losing $20,000 a month. And that was the first time I had a number like that. Now, back then it was probably more like, I don't know, it might have been like 200,000. I don't know what the inflation rate would be, but it was massive. It was absolutely massive. And I just was like choking. I said to my husband, how are we going to buy groceries? How are we going to live? And how are we going to pay for the medical care for this baby? And my husband said, just pay like $5 to each creditor and I will figure it out. And so that was a very scary time for me because there was no real safety net. It wasn't like, oh, I just had this inheritance that I could rely on. And because industry was poor at that time, it was very difficult to even find another job to be able to support us. So my husband just worked like a dog. He would work like 20 hours days, literally. He would sleep for 3 or 4 hours and that was it. Then we had our baby and in the midst of that, this baby had massive colic and just cried constantly. So I didn't sleep either. He would sleep in the other room sometimes on the few hours that he did sleep. But my health struggled. And then I had postpartum depression that I went through. The stress was just unbelievable. It was the most massive stress that we have ever been through. And my husband was running on empty. So he couldn't give to me. I was running on empty. So I could barely keep up with the things that I needed to do. And then to have the physical health struggle in addition to my mental health. So that was a really tough time. But what that taught me was empathy. I already had empathy before because I felt things so deeply. Gosh, I'm going to get emotional just talking about it. But I had such a deeper empathy for people that were suffering to that extreme level. I just hadn't suffered like that in that way before and compounded with several different things. I felt abandoned by my husband because he was working so much. We were living in this new town. We couldn't even afford a telephone. So I didn't have a telephone and I had no friends. I had no support system. And so it was understandable why I experienced the postpartum depression, but I had so much more empathy for people that were struggling either with their mental health or their physical health. Whenever I saw and sensed that someone was struggling, I would be right on their doorstep. How can I help? What could I do? And just listening. And many times that was all somebody needed. But I love to make dinner for people because I knew how hard it was to do the basics. And so I was always striving to help people with whatever they needed, either babysitting or making dinner or whatever I could do at the time to help. And that was something that really taught me about being a detective. If I sense something, to really dig deeper, because a lot of people say things like, call if you need something. And I didn't like that because I felt awkward when it was me calling them and saying, could you take the baby so I could take a nap? But if somebody came over and said, which only happened like once or twice, I did make a friend and she did come over. And I remember she said, I'm just going to take the kids and you just rest. I was just like, let me kiss your feet.
Yes.
I learned that it wasn't enough to just make those blanket hollow offers, that it needed to be something that was specific. And as a leader, that makes such a difference with your team when you can sense what they're struggling with and you can say, oh, hey, come on in, let's chat. Tell me what's going on. I sense something is happening with you. I sense that you might have a lot on your plate. And then instead of saying, what can I do that's a good question. What could I do to take things off your plate? But to even say, would it help if we give you some flex hours right now or come up with an idea of something concrete? And then that opens the gate and they say, wow, this person is really thinking about what I need. They sense what I need. And then making it safe so that they were able to express what they need.
Yes. And
I
they
found,
care and they come across as caring for a person. They're not just a number. Oh, there's so much in everything you've just said. I want to roll back, Karen, because it was like you gave us a whole meal there. It wasn't just a starter. So, going back to rolling back there to the time where it was really hard for you and you were going through all of that, there's always something I feel when we're going through a tough time, however, whatever level of tough that is, that's something that our soul is trying to teach us. What is the good that is coming from this? And you spoke to the good that came from that, right? But what part of you was able to keep going through that? Because there was a lot going on there. What did you lean into? Did you have some strategy? What, when you look back now, do you think that was the mindset, that was the way that I was looking at things? What was it that helped you to get through those times?
I relied a lot on prayer and connecting spiritually with my source. People would say the universe, I say God, but connecting in a spiritual way. I really relied on divine help because I didn't have mortals. I didn't have mortals that I could rely on. And so I turned to that, and it deepened my faith. Like, my kids ask me about it, and some of my kids remember some of those really tough times, because we didn't just have one tough time, we had numerous tough times. And they have said, even now they say, we can see how your faith grew so much, and because of that, you strengthened our faith, because you taught us the things that you learned and the ways that you were able to get through it. And one of the things, so I had some little mantras that would come to my mind that I would feel like was an answer to prayer. And one of the ones that was very powerful was, I'll figure this out. But it wasn't I, it was we. It was me and the divine. We will figure this out. And so I always said, we will figure this out. But I think it's important to also think, I will figure this out, because that's empowering for me. But I always say, if I ever do say, I will figure it out, I say, I will figure it out with divine help.
Yeah.
Or as a team or something like that. And then I remember when somebody wrote the book, Everything is Figure Outable. I think it was Maria Forleo. And I laughed when I saw that title. I'm like, that's been my mantra for so long, that this is figure outable, and that I will figure this out, and we will figure this out. But that empowering thought was so beneficial to me, because even when I had no idea how in the world that it could be figured out, it looked impossible. And many of the situations I was in looked absolutely impossible. And it looked like there was an impasse many times, or like the Grand Canyon, like this huge cavern. How was I ever going to cross that and get to the other side? But when I kept that thought in my mind and I kept that mindset, it would lift me above. And I remember thinking of it like back when, I don't know if you did this when you were a girl, but I used to love to write postcards. And many times, and I loved getting postcards. And so whenever our family would go camping or go on a trip or whatever, I would get postcards and send them off to people. And I remember thinking one time that the mindset that I had trained myself to do was to look for the things that I could celebrate, to look for the things to be grateful for, even as a girl when I was writing the postcard. And I didn't have room in the postcard to say, we got a flat tire, and let me tell you about how awful it was sitting by the side of the road for 15 hours and blah, blah, blah. I didn't have time to say all of those things. And so I would maybe say, we got a flat tire, but you'll never believe the miracle that happened. Somebody came along and rescued us. And I would always go to the thing that I was grateful for, because that empowered me and that lifted me. And so I remember thinking sometimes when I was in the middle of the worst possible situation, I remember one time things were just so bleak, just so bleak. And the thought came to me, what would your future self say in a postcard about this? If you could write a postcard about what you've been going through and what is coming, what would you write? And that was such a funny thought to me, because I thought, I love postcards. And so I started writing, what had happened so far that I could actually say was something good. And then I thought, what possible good thing could come out of this? And then I had to use my imagination. And I remember one time I was getting life coaching from someone, and she said, do you know that you have a real strength with figuring out how to deal with struggles? And I said, no. And she said, you have this pattern that you follow. Every time you talk to me about struggles, you say a similar pattern. And I said, really, what do I say? And it was like I was inside the bottle, so I couldn't read the label on the outside. But she saw this pattern in me. And when she identified it, I just laughed. I was like, oh my goodness, that is so me. I absolutely do that. And she said, you have a vivid imagination for imagining what the good could be, what good could come out of this thing. And I didn't even know that I had that. But then I was able to tap into it intentionally, say to myself, because I did it frequently, like almost all the time. But when I was in a situation where my emotions were really escalated, I didn't do it because I couldn't remember to do it. And so I had to learn a process. Well, we can go into that later, but I had to learn a process to regulate my own emotions so that I could get back to using my imagination.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And that's another thing, isn't it? It's pattern recognition. He recognized it for you. So now you can use it because it's a good pattern recognition. And a lot of people will go into patterns and those patterns aren't serving them, but you were going into a pattern that truly was serving you. So there's two, right? There's the ones that are serving you that you can go, oh, now I know it's there and I can just pick that pattern up and go do the thing when I'm in that situation, which I'm sure you're going to tell us about in a second. Or this is my pattern recognition over here, and it's not serving me, and I'm losing time, I'm losing friends, I'm losing whatever you're losing. And now you see the pattern, you can change it to something that's more empowering. And so
Right.
pattern recognition is fantastic. So that's another thing that you use. So you've got curiosity, you've got really active listening, you have got pattern recognition that's really good. And there was something else that you've got as well that I picked out and I can't remember what it was.
I think it was maybe imagination.
Imagination. There we go. Imagination. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you're future pacing yourself. So you're looking at your future self and going, I know there's my future self here, right here. What does she see? What does she see the ending's going to be?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I love it. Audience, take notes. If you're not taking notes already, take notes. So, yeah, do share with us what that is. What is the pattern that you go into when you're really struggling, Karen, to get out of that?
I think it might be helpful because I didn't share a pattern that was not serving me. So I'm going to share a pattern that didn't serve me as well,
Oh, do.
because I have found that many people have this same pattern. And that is that I was a worrier. And as a girl, my mom was fairly optimistic, but she would also look at obstacles. She always wanted to know like details. Like she would plan an itinerary and want to know a lot of details. And so I would worry about the details, about what if this, I used to say, what if all the time? What if this happens? What if that happens? And I always thought this is a good thing because I'm getting prepared. But I took it to a negative degree where I started catastrophizing. And I would default to, like, for an example, when I was in my early years of marriage, if my husband and I had an argument, I think, oh no, everything's terrible, because connection was so important to me that I thought, oh no, we're never going to talk again. Or we're never going to resolve this. Oh, this problem is just so big, we're never going to resolve it. Or what if we get a divorce or something like that? So my brain would catastrophize and I would go down this rabbit hole that was very negative. And that probably was part of the reason why I was susceptible to the postpartum depression, because I was in the middle of the worst rabbit hole. I didn't imagine that one was real, but I had a hard time imagining that something good would come out of it. And I remember somebody said to me one time, she's my best friend actually, and she said to me, you've got to stop. You're going 20 years down the road. And she said, let's just focus on what you're going to make for dinner tonight.
I love that. That's perfect. That
It
is
was so
so
perfect.
perfect.
But we didn't know it at the time because we didn't talk about things in these words. But she brought me back to the present. She brought me back to thinking, okay, what do I have? What's my task that I can focus on right now? And then to remember, I am safe right now. It's okay. I have a roof over my head. And I would do these things to remind myself of everything that I wasn't going through that could have been way worse. I remember my mom said to me one time, she said, you could be living in a war-torn country and going through all of these things. And she said, you don't have that additional burden. And I was like, wow, that's for sure. Yes, being bankrupt is horrible, and having all these, my health, all these other things are terrible. But I am not also dealing with a bomb going off right here, heaven forbid. And again, that also helped me to have more empathy for people that were suffering in ways that I wasn't, and to be, but it also helped me to be grateful, because I could say, I can still breathe. I'm not dealing with an artificial lung. I can still walk. And I remember reading a poem one time as a girl, and this poem would often come back to me. And it was about a person that was encountering people that couldn't walk. And they would say, oh, at least I can walk. And then they would meet a blind person. Oh my goodness, at least I have my eyesight. And that gratitude, that poem and that gratitude really touched me, because I remember incorporating that. And so I would catastrophize, but then I would get to the point where I would stop myself, come back to the present, and say, what is it that I can be grateful for in the midst of this very difficult trial and adversity? And I would find the thing. But then I got to where I would use my imagination, and I would say, okay, so you're grateful that you can see, but what's the lesson that you might be gaining from this? And then that was where I would use my curiosity and my imagination to dig deeper. And that part was even more empowering than just saying, I can still hear or I can still walk. Because I took those things for granted. And so
Mm.
when I had to use my imagination on a deeper level for something else that I could be grateful for, it first of all, it really stimulated my brain to be active and to be curious. And then it was a problem. It was like a riddle. And my brain loves riddles. And so I would answer the riddle, what possible good thing could come out of this? And that's the thing that I use to this day.
Oh, I love that. That is so brilliant. And I've crossed my fingers here because I was like, I want to remember something. And you spoke about a poem that you would go back to that spoke to you. What I would love to be able to do is put that poem in the comments and who wrote it, so that if you're thinking, I wish I knew because I love poetry. I love writing poetry. I love reading poetry. I don't do it enough. But that poem, I'm going to put that in the comments. So do remember to send that to us. Like, I'm going to remember to ask you that. Fantastic. And then, so with that, so that was the negative, and then you realized it. And yes, and being grateful for the things that we have, and looking at, my cousin used to say, it's not the worst thing that could have happened. And you think,
Right.
yeah, I know, you're absolutely right. It's not the worst thing that could have happened. It was still pretty, ugh, but it's not the worst thing that could have happened. Okay. And then, as you're saying, it's what else can I be grateful for? And you don't really need to look very far, do you, Karen, to be
Right.
grateful? We're standing here, we're talking, we're the other side of the world from each other, and we're safe. We're both safe in our homes, right? So we're both grateful for that. And so then we were speaking before about what when you came out of this and you were using that, so how do you use that? I need to regulate myself and pull back and get grounded again, and so that you can use the good stuff, the good patterning.
Yes. So this is something that was a journey ever since I've been young. So I'm a highly sensitive person, an HSP, and I did not know that there are actual tests that determine that this is a genetic tendency. I did not know that. I didn't know that there were even like grasshoppers. There's all kinds of species that they can do these tests on and find out that they have this gene for being highly sensitive. And I was like, wow, because I thought that it for many years that it was a fault that I was so sensitive. And I'm also an empath. So I feel things very deeply. So not only am I sensitive to pick up on things, but then I feel it very deeply and the emotions stay with me. So when I would get my feelings hurt, it was very challenging for me as a child to let that go. And my mom would say, just be like a duck and let it roll off your back. And I said, my back has Velcro. I don't know how to let it roll off my back. And my dear mother was always trying to help me learn these lessons. So my mother would say, you wake up, it's a new day. and start it all over again. And I would say, I'm still thinking about the thing that happened yesterday. So my mother, bless her heart, was always trying to help me learn these skills. I misinterpreted that as a child and thought there was something wrong with me. And I did work on those skills, thank heavens. And I did learn a lot of those things that she was trying to teach me as a child. It took me a long time to learn those things, but I did learn them layer by layer. And I'm very grateful that she taught me those things. But the problem was that as a child, I thought there must be something wrong with me because not everybody in my family had that same issue of feeling things so deeply and having trouble regulating their emotions like I did. We didn't talk about regulating emotions back then. We didn't talk about emotional intelligence. No one had coined that word, like Daniel Goleman hadn't written his book. And so it was just like we talked about stress and we talked about calming ourselves and things like that, but we didn't really have the tools at that point in time to do that. I was also born 2.5 months premature. I weighed 1 pound, 13 ounces shortly after birth. So I was a little itty bitty thing all alone in an incubator for 2.5 months. My mother couldn't hold me. She couldn't nurse me or anything. And so I think part of the reason why I had some of the feelings that I did, I had fears, I had anxiety, was because of that early experience. And maybe part of the reason that I was so sensitive was because of that. Maybe that was part of the reason why I struggled to regulate my emotions. I don't really know, but I didn't have a mother that could hold me as a baby when I felt afraid or something startled me. There was nobody there except a nurse. And she was working. So she wasn't able to just take me and take care of me like a mother does for her baby. As I grew, that was just something that I really thought that I was flawed. And I remember my dad said to me, "You have a gift." And I did not understand what he was saying at all. I could not comprehend it. Just, there was no way to absorb that thought because I had thought the thought so many times that there was something wrong with me that it was a belief. And his new thought that he was introducing did not land. The seed lay dormant for many years until one day I realized that I could sense things from people that I was around. And this was before I had gone through all the bankruptcy and all that kind of thing, but I could still sense things in people. So much so that I remember at the university, when the professor would say something, I would put a little star by it. And my classmates would look at they were always looking at my notes and they were saying, "Can I have a copy of your notes?" And they were like, "Why do you put a star right there by that?" And I said, "That's going to be on the test." And they would say, "How do you know?" And I would say, "I could just tell by the way that her voice inflection." So they would always say, "Let's have a study group together." And I would tell them, I would say, "Now make sure you memorize this because this is going to be on the test." And it always was. And they were just like, "Wow, how do you know those things?" But I didn't just know things like that. I just knew when, like, sometimes I would talk to somebody or I wouldn't talk to somebody and I would just feel, "Oh, I think that person is struggling." And sometimes I knew why and sometimes I didn't. But I really had this sense about things. And so I started realizing, especially like in college and with roommates and different things, that not everybody had that, especially with my fellow classmates. I was like, "What do you think's going to be on the test?" And they're like, "I don't know." Everything's going to be on the test. And I'm like, "Oh," and I realized, "Oh my goodness, I am perceiving something that other people aren't perceiving." And then when I realized I perceived it in relationships when other people didn't perceive it, my dad's words came back to me. And I was like, "Oh, this is what he was trying to tell me, was that this is a gift, that I can perceive things, that I am highly sensitive, that things that other people might miss, I pick up on. Not that I'm perfect, because I do miss things too, and I don't pick up on everything, which I wish I would, but I do pick up on things that have aided me in numerous ways in building teams, in helping to even to discern what is true and what isn't true so that I know how to move forward. And so that has been an interesting journey for me. But the other thing that came with that was that when I was emotionally dysregulated and my emotions are just escalating, and maybe it's fear or maybe it's shame or whatever the emotion is, I couldn't calm myself down, and for a while. And that was where I went through that process that the coach identified, and the process got more efficient and quicker over time because I would start to realize that pattern. I didn't quite recognize all of the pieces of the pattern, but one of the things that I would do at first was I was in shock. I was like, what just happened? And I always ask that question, what just happened? What's going on here? Why would that person do that thing or say that thing? And so I was immediately curious. And honestly, I just thought that it was because I was in shock that I was asking questions. But then I realized that was my curiosity, and that was asking questions. So because I asked the questions, that moved me through the shock phase into the next stage of actual grieving, because I was grieving at the moment, where I would do the research to try and figure things out. And I didn't realize at first that was what I was doing, but then that little mantra came to me: we will figure this out. Even when everything was baffling to me and I was just flabbergasted. I think you would say gobsmacked. How do you say that? Gobsmacked.
Gobsmacked. I was absolutely gobsmacked. Yes.
But not in a good way. I was gobsmacked in a bad way. And so I remember going through that process when I could, and I would find fault with myself. Why is it taking me so long to get over this? Why can't I figure this out quicker? And when I realized I was judging myself, and I was judging myself harshly, I realized, oh, I had to have someone point that out to me to say, why are you so harsh with yourself? You're so kind with other people. You have so much empathy for other people. Why are you harsh with yourself? But I had higher expectations of myself. I should be able to figure this out by now. I should be able to regulate my emotions by now. And I realized I put time limits on myself because as a child, I had been trying to get over it quicker. And so I learned to have empathy for myself first. And I learned to say, it's okay if you can't figure it out yet. It's okay if you still feel fear. It's okay if you haven't gotten over that by now. And then I would show love to myself. And that was the most amazing process, because that compassion for myself immediately helped me start to regulate my emotions. And I would come down layer by layer. And I was only effective at having empathy for other people when I first had empathy for myself. I didn't understand that because it was really easy for me to serve somebody that was struggling because of what I had been through. And I didn't really realize that when I was in a team setting, and even in a family setting or community setting, that my emotions affected other people. And when I calmed myself and I showed love to myself, they felt it and they were able to regulate their emotions as well. So co-regulation, I didn't really understand for a long time. I understood how I could get dysregulated when someone else was stressed. I also understood how I could be calmed when someone else was a calming influence. But I didn't know that I had that influence over other people. So when I saw how important it was for me to show empathy for myself so that I could regulate my own emotions, and then I could help other people to co-regulate, and I could then tap into all my mantras. I couldn't even remember my mantras when I was dysregulated, but then I could regulate layer by layer, and then I could use my curiosity. It was a little more challenging to use the depth of curiosity that I needed. And so I was able to problem solve after I was empathetic to myself. I was able to influence others in a much more effective manner. And there were all kinds of peak performance tools that I was able to access that I couldn't access when I was in a dysregulated state. And that is the thing that I find is one of the most powerful tools for people that are peak performers, is learning how to regulate their emotions when they are stressed so that they can then help their team. Most people don't realize that. They just think, I'll just push it aside. I'll just tell everybody that everything's fine. It's all good. And that's how we'll get through this. But people sense those things that are authentic.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting for me. I was talking to a person who was in a crisis, a financial crisis. The team was scared to death. They thought there was a merger and they thought they were going to lose their jobs. And the leader said, I thought this was fascinating. They said, I don't know what's going to happen. We haven't figured that all out yet. And I had been coaching this leader. And when the leader told me what they said, I said, do you realize what you just did there? You were able to help your team feel safe because you were authentic and you were vulnerable and you let them know that you didn't know, which was perfectly fine to say that. Many leaders think they can't admit that. We can't ever admit that. But what that does is that also buys loyalty.
I was
People
going to
feel
say it's bonding, isn't it?
it's bonding. It's
Yeah.
very bonding. Then the people, they realize, oh, I'm not the only one that feels that. And it's safe enough for him to express it or
Yeah, and
her.
he or her, she is human as well.
They're human,
Absolutely.
just like me, just like me. And then the thing that is so interesting is that when the leader has regulated their own emotions, they're able to say, but we will get through this. We'll figure it out
Figure
together.
it out. I knew that was coming. I love that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. This has been a wonderful conversation, Karen. Absolutely. I'm sure we could go on for another couple of hours, but we won't.
Next time.
Thank Yeah, there'll be step 2 on this journey with Karen. Our listeners, I'm sure, are still hanging on and still would love to know a little bit more. Have you got 3 top tips that you would like to give them before we end out?
Yes. So as a recap what we talked about, but my top tips are number one, how important it is to show empathy to yourself. And we talk a lot about self-love, and a lot of people get confused and think it's a bubble bath or something like that. Some people think it's selfish to show self-love to yourself, but it is the most unselfish thing that you can do because when you show self-love to yourself, you regulate your emotions, you are able to come back to a place of love. You are able to give more love to other people when you show love to yourself. And we often have heard the phrase of you can't pour from an empty pitcher, that we have to fill our cup to be able to give to other people. But it's so much deeper with that empathy for ourselves
Mm.
because then we have the ability to tap into empathy for the other person. So I didn't say this, but Anne, I just want to add this little thought here because you might say, wait a second, you said it was easy for you to be empathetic for other people. It was easy for me to be empathetic to other people unless they were attacking me. And if they were attacking me, and if I was being criticized in a very harsh, demeaning way, or if I was being misjudged, I was being shamed, and especially if it was public, that was very difficult for me to have empathy for that other person. But through this process, I would show myself self-love in the midst of that. And then I was able to have empathy for them. I would think to myself, like I said, why would they be saying that? I wonder what unmet need they have at this moment. And so, in these very high stakes, high conflict situations, I was only able to tap into empathy when I showed empathy to myself. So, the second takeaway would be how important it is to show empathy for someone else after you've shown empathy for yourself. And the third thing is, I guess I said three. First is self love. Second is learning how to regulate your emotions. And third is being able to show empathy for other people.
Empathy to others.
Yeah, those are my three most important keys that I teach people.
I love that. I love that so much because when we can do that, it's somebody else was saying the other day, and I totally agree with it. The first person you should fall in love with is yourself
Yes. Yes.
instead of looking it for it out there. So it's the same. It's like when you love yourself, you're filling up your cup with love for you, and now you can give love to others. Same with your empathy. Have your empathy and it's not it is being selfish, but it's being selfish in the most positive way. It's not selfish as in nasty selfish, it's selfish as in I'm filling up my cup here so that I can pour over from the overflow and give, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. For our audience, there'll be another video coming up on screen. So I will see you over there. And do give this a thumbs up. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Wonderful to be with you.
Bye bye for now. Bye.
Bye bye.